Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. How are you all? How's the morning been? Good. Could I request for you to come forward so we can see you and talk closer with you? This room is so huge that it just feels like there's three pairs of eyes dotted around the stadium. If I could ask you to move forward, thank you. Hello and welcome. I hope that you've all been having a lovely morning. My name is Aleya Kassam. Unfortunately, Mshai couldn't be with us this afternoon, so I will be hoping to step into her huge shoes. It's really, really an honor to be part of this particular conversation. Today, we're going to be discussing the dangers of a single story. It's something that's been talked about a lot, and yet perhaps not enough. It's a delight to welcome our guests. We have with us Ungulani, Karibu Sana, and we have the Ungulani's translator, Gabriela. Welcome, Gabriela. We have Monaja, and we have Mohamed. Welcome. And welcome to all of you. Just to start us out, I'd like to give you a sense of who's in the room, just so that you get as excited as I am. Ungulani. Let's begin with Ungulani. Ungulani was born in Mozambique in 1957. This is important and relevant in this moment, 1957. He has degrees in law, history, and geography. He wrote op-eds for several newspapers, co-founded the literary magazine Charua, and was deputy director at the National Institute of Cinema and Audiovisual of Mozambique. Currently, he's the director of the National Institute of Books and Records and the Secretary General of the Association of Mozambican Writers. His debut book, Ulalapi, is listed as one of the best 100 African books of the 20th century. It is so far his only publication that was translated into English. Welcome, Ungulani. Sitting next to him, we have Monaja. Monaja is a performing artist, musician. He's got a history in academia, specifically in history, actually, and very passionate about community organizing. And his worldview informs his music, and we'll talk a little bit later about what his worldview is. Sitting directly to my left is Mohamed Abdirizak, peace and human rights activist, who has volunteered extensively with Amnesty International and is a founder and director of Agents of Peace. So, the danger of a single story. I'm going to read the blurb here. The conquerors of Africa wrote accounts of the continent's history that still have an impact today. Discover the role of literature in rewriting a nation, a continent's history. Mr. Ungulani, I would like to begin with you.
Yes.
I think right here we have two very distinct generations of Africans. We have one generation that was that was born into the world, into the continent, just before the wave of independence. And then we have a generation here who inherited a world, a continent, a nation that was formed by the generation before. So, Ungulani, I would like to ask you, what were the stories that you entered into as a young man? What was it that you learned about yourself from what was available to you in literature? As not even independence, but as a young man, what was his understanding of himself from what he read?
boa tarde mais uma vez.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Já agradeci de manhã à organização
I thanked you this morning to the
por estar
organization.
aqui. E ainda a pergunta que a moderadora me coloca, eu talvez seja de uma geração que, quando o meu país se tornou independente, eu estava já quase que no fim da adolescência, tinha 18 anos, praticamente.
I'm from a generation where, when my country got independence, I was maybe past 18 years old, so I was almost a teenager, not a teenager anymore.
Portanto, vivi o chamado período colonial.
I saw the colonial period.
E o período pós-independência.
And the post-independence period.
Mas vou fazer um parêntese.
I'll make a parenthesis.
Não sou assim tão velho, meu país é novo.
I'm not that old, my country is young.
Portanto, tornou-se independente em 75.
It became independent in 75.
Não é como Quênia, lá nos anos 60.
Like Kenya.
E vamos lá ver uma coisa.
Let's see this.
Em relação ao que eu senti, é que, em teoria,
in theory, what I felt
é que durante a independência o meu país disse coisas muito bonitas para uma pessoa de 18 anos.
During the Independence Day, my country would say very beautiful things for a young man, for 18-year-old boy.
Vamos acabar com a pobreza.
Let's finish the poverty.
Vamos criar emprego para todos.
Let's make everyone employed.
O acesso à escola para todos.
Education.
Quer dizer, vamos criar uma sociedade igualitária.
Let's create an egalitarian society.
Uma ideologia na altura revolucionária.
An ideology at that time it was revolutionary.
Trabalhar com o povo.
To work with the people.
Isso, em teoria, qualquer jovem de 18 anos encanta-se.
In theory, every young man would be enchanted by this idea.
Mas passados 4 anos depois da independência,
4 years later,
os que proclamaram a independência,
the ones who proclaimed independence,
criaram um partido único.
They created one party.
Eliminaram, digamos, uma imprensa livre.
The free press.
E diferentemente dos outros países africanos,
Different from the other countries of Africa.
Entrou-se naquilo que a gente chamava de capitalismo de Estado.
We got into the capitalism of state capitalism.
E o jovem que era na altura da independência,
the young man that I was,
já um pouco senhor, com seus 20 e tal anos,
a little bit old with 20 years old,
começou também a revoltar-se em relação ao seu próprio país.
I began to feel a revolt or something like that.
Portanto, como o tempo é pequeno,
time is short.
Eu vou dizer o seguinte: há sentido de alegria, de fascínio, porque o país é independente.
So there's a feeling of happiness and fascination because the country is now independent.
E por outro lado,
by the other hand,
total, como é que eu vou dizer? Desagrado, talvez seja a palavra, total desagrado em relação ao percurso que o país levou.
On the other hand, complete unsatisfaction with the moving.
Posso parar por aqui um bocadinho, senão depois nunca mais
acaba.
You
stop a little bit and then go on. Quando você escuta.
When you hear the words "the danger of a single story," what does that mean for you? What does it evoke?
Essa expressão, o perigo que pode ter uma única história, o que isso significa para você?
A primeira, eu vivi na prática, não é, essa narrativa única. Né?
So I lived this one narrative in my own life.
Primeiro, os libertadores da pátria.
The people who freed the nation.
Tornaram-se os heróis.
They become the heroes.
E toda a grande história do meu país
all the big history for my country
começou com eles.
Start with them.
Porque eles é que libertaram o país.
because they freed the country. So
E a Praça dos Heróis.
the parks was all for the heroes, the monuments.
Todos os que estão lá só são aqueles que participaram da luta de libertação.
All of the men that are worshipped are the men who participated in the.
Aqueles que tiveram papel no período colonial ou período pré-colonial não entram na narrativa.
The ones who had played a role in the colonial times or post or even before, they were forgotten.
E durante todo este tempo, de cerca de 40 anos de independência,
So during all this time, around 40 years of independence,
a narrativa que foi sendo construída
the built narrative
foi sempre em volta à evocação desses que libertaram a pátria.
was all about the people who freed the nations and not
Eu-
the earlier characters.
Só hoje é que a gente está a libertar-se mais, sente-se isso.
Only today we are freed, but you still feel this.
That, I think, is not an unfamiliar feeling for many sitting in this space right now. And the conquerors, it's not just the conquerors of Africa as the colonialists, but also the new conquerors that seem to have created their own story as well. Monaja, would you, I feel like this is something we were talking about just earlier, about in Kenya, the single narrative of a certain type of person or a certain community having led the freedom struggle and that becoming the narrative. Is that something that you would like to talk about and explore a little bit?
Thanks. I think there are many ways of looking at, I think one of the things that we should also ask ourselves is, who's writing this history? Because history comes from some place. As someone, if I personally talk about the life that I've lived, I know that I come from a background of privilege, some sort of privilege going on there. And if I just write a history that speaks to my privilege, and I'd say the biggest problems that I face as a Kenyan is, I don't know, paying my rent, okay? And possibly I'd be writing in 2019 AD. If we're supposed to use that categorization of time. But when we talk about the danger of single history, when it comes to the independence struggle, as someone who comes from the mountains, Mount Kenya, that is true that there is some sort of entitlement fed by the fact that the anti-colonial struggle was quite intense in the mountains as compared to other parts of the country. Like in the sense of Mau Mau, and they were not even called Mau Mau, but Kenya Land and Freedom Army. Does that, to be honest, I think we also kind of need to problematize some of these stories. That to some extent is a single narrative. But further back, I think for me, again, there are so many ways of looking at this, but I think what I'd say speaks to me, the phrase speaks to me, the danger of the single history, is a civilization myth of the colonialists, of how it was a white man's burden to uplift the African, and how that was, of course, informed by the idea of history as progress, that will come with progress from Europe, and we're going to put it in Africa, and we're going to be civilized, for lack of a better word. And that with time has had a lot of effects. It has affected our psyche. It has affected our self-esteem as a people. It has affected our ethos. And how can you expect someone who has a low self-esteem to imagine when every day he's bombarded with knowledge, he interacts with knowledge on how Africans should organize, and it should be organized according to the European modern state as we know it. And we can't think of other ways because we have that, and this is just a theory of mine, we have that deficit because of, and I'll give you an example of the Cameroonian national anthem, of how it had to be rewritten in the 70s because it was actually an ode to French colonialism. I can read the anthem maybe later on. Or would you? Okay. So the anthem goes. They had to. Okay, so let me possibly give you some context. O Cameroon, birthplace of our ancestors. In the past, you lived in barbarism. You are appearing like the sun. Little by little, you leave the savagery behind. This is something that they imbibed. So that was like an ode to. This is what colonialism was like. We were savages. And then around the 70s, they rewrote the anthem and they did away with the barbarism and the savagery, the words that were dehumanizing them. But now you'd also ask yourself, as a country singing that anthem, what was going on in their psyche? And we know that Cameroon, the France-Afrique, and how it was really a neo-colony, as is Kenya, how it was difficult for their leaders with that mentality that indeed they were barbaric, for them to reimagine from a point of, I feel my heritage, I'm confident in my heritage, I'm confident in the histories of my ancestors, without taking the narrative that the French were. Yeah.
Thank you, Monaja. Mohamed, what does it mean to you, the danger of a single story, when you hear that phrase?
Thank you. Thank you, Aleya. My name is Mohamed. I'll put it into two categories. Number one, there is one I have experienced by myself. As a Kenyan, as a Somali, and at the same time as a Muslim. And you remember 2006, 2007, it was the birth of Al-Shabaab in Somalia. So in Kenya, we are living right now, not about the youth, but some of the youth, and at the same time, non-youth believe that if you see a Somali person, you see Al-Shabaab. So in this morning, I asked two questions to two different people. Non-Somalis living with us in Italy, and non-Somalis working within the town. So the question is this. The one was, when you hear the word Congo, what will be coming to your mind? And they said, all of them, Ebola. It's a negative, you see. So nobody knows the resources Congo has and how they are doing. But what we see and know is what? The disease. Then I asked them what about Somali? And they said, Al-Shabaab. Then I asked them, when you hear the word Al-Shabaab, what will come to your mind? And they said, the refugees of Somali origins. You see? So how did they get this information? It's through the media. So if you show the people that Al-Shabaab are from Somalia, they are Somalis, they are terrorists. But you don't show them how it has started. Number one, who are the ringleaders? Are they really Somalis or non-Somalis? Something like that. So when I heard about the danger of single story, it's like it touched me personally and my community, because we were referred like a terrorist right now, like a terrorist. And whenever we are walking to a government building, we have to go two searches. Number one, identify yourself as a Kenyan or not. Second, then you have to go to another side. What are they searching? A bomb from you. All of the Somalis are going through that. But if we go into deep, who are these people committing all these crimes? Most of them are non-Somalis. You see? So now, if you feed me with a negative information, and I pick it, there's one thing you have to understand then. As Africans, in this century, the youth we are very much glued to the TV and social media than the books you have. So whatever I see from the TV is what I'm going to believe it, whether it's wrong or not. Now somebody is saying that whenever I heard the word Congo, I see Ebola. Then I ask him, do you know how rich Congo is when it comes to natural resources? And they say, no, they are refugees and they are poor. So who created this environment? Are they Africans or not? Then, last week, I attended a function in Sili, and I asked them another question, that is there anyone among you who knows Thomas Sankara? They were government agents who were Somali origin, some Kenyans. There was our community leaders, some were even working for Somali government. Nobody knows Thomas Sankara. And he was the first African, a youth leader, who implemented gender equality in Burkina Faso. You see? So when I see the danger of a single story, it's like Africa, the only thing we feed the world is negative, but we can change that.
I would challenge you, Mohamed, and to say that there's another single narrative that I've noticed coming out of the continent, which is Africa Rising. And it's sort of a pushback against the poverty porn that the world has been fed of Africa, is now we are the ones with all the opportunity, the ones with the shiny toys. In a way that has started becoming as dangerous of a single narrative as the other one. But I would like to steer the conversation back to literature specifically. In an environment where the people who are the ones in power are the ones who control information, how then can you start to use stories to challenge that dominant narrative?
Obrigado.
How can I use
Das histórias para a mudança. Yeah. Sim, mas há aqui pequeno detalhe que eu acho que nós devemos ver. Porque estamos a jogar aqui como muitos fatores, não é?
We're playing with a lot of factors.
Fatores externos e fatores internos.
External and internal.
Para a análise de uma sociedade.
To analyze a society.
Mas nós temos que ver elemento que eu acho que é fundamental e básico.
But one element that I consider fundamental and basic.
Que é o elemento que nós descuramos e que temos esses problemas hoje que temos em África.
Is the element with which we explore these problems.
Temos problema que é a questão que é o ponto fundamental para a existência de uma narrativa única e tal, é a não inclusão.
Yeah, so this is the fundamental thing which will determine if a narrative is going to...
Não inclusão.
Yeah, the non-inclusion.
Portanto, o outro. Não inclusão, o outro.
The non-inclusion of the other.
Dou o exemplo do meu conterrâneo aqui da Somália.
My friend from Somalia, for example.
Por exemplo, a Somália era talvez tirando Cabo Verde, talvez o único país africano.
Besides Cape Verde, maybe the only country in Africa.
Que tinha uma língua oficial, não é?
That would have one language, official language.
Do norte ao sul do país, não é? Para além da língua, tanto a língua local para além. Portanto, a partida é um país diferente, não é?
So from starters is a different
como Moçambique, onde tem 40 grupos étnicos.
From Mozambique, that we have 40
Quênia tem 60
groups.
E tal, se não está. Étnicos, onde a diversidade é muito grande.
The diversity is very, very big.
Mas quando cai poder centralizador,
when you have a centralized power,
o resultado é o esfarelamento da própria sociedade.
The result is
Porque começam a surgir grupos que não tiveram inclusão de vida.
You see groups emerging who didn't have before the inclusion.
Veja a sociedade como a de Mobutu.
You see Mobutu.
O Congo era aquilo como Mobutu, porque centralizava tudo, não é?
Congo used to centralize everything.
Era aquele fulano, segundo os jornalistas, ele pagava o conselho de ministros, pagava os ministros,
People that journalists would pay the minister.
A porta da casa dele.
at his door.
E o ministro, por sua vez, chamava o diretor nacional, descontava-lhe a porta da casa.
The minister would call the director and he was pay
E o
him in the
diretor,
house.
por sua vez, em cadeia. Quer dizer, a centralização onde é que levou. Agora,
The
nós, o
centralization.
primeiro ponto que eu acho que é fundamental é a inclusão. O outro tem que estar na máquina do poder.
Yeah, the fundamental point on this is the inclusion, because the other has to be in the machine of power.
O segundo ponto é a nossa unidade na diversidade.
The second one is our unity in the diversity.
Nós somos um país multiétnico,
We are a multi-ethnic country,
um país onde há várias cores,
a lot of colors,
mas é necessário que esta diversidade, não é, se transforme, digamos, num verdadeiro arco-íris, não é?
it's a must that this diversity really turns into a rainbow.
Não é? No arco-íris. O que não aconteceu. E esses conflitos,
happen.
por sua vez, a existir, são exacerbados por fatores externos. Daí que a narrativa única
The only narrative
é uma narrativa excludente.
is a narrative that excludes.
E quando se exclui, tarde ou cedo, a sociedade estoura.
When you exclude, sooner or later the society will just dismember itself.
Portanto, hoje, num mundo para além das ideologias,
So today, in a world that goes beyond ideologies,
eu acho que esses fatores internos são fundamentais para que nós possamos ter a nossa vida.
these internal factors, they are fundamental for us to have our lives.
E o Monaja, desculpa lá, sou um bocadinho, sorry, só um time. E o Monaja deu um aspecto que eu acho que é o terceiro elemento,
So Monaja gave the third aspect,
que é recuperar a nossa memória,
to prepare our memory,
recuperar a nossa
to fix our
tradição,
memory. Yes.
e sabermos quem somos nós
To
para
know who
podermos
we are,
defender.
so we can defend ourselves.
Se tu vais para a Índia, não sei o que, tens culturas milenares, não é
You go
isso?
to India, you have millennial cultures.
O Ocidente ou não entra ali, mas não abana. Mas nós aqui, um vento de 30 km/h,
But here with the wind for 30 kilometers an hour,
abana-nos a todos nós,
it waves us all
porque não temos os pés no chão.
because we don't have the feet on the ground.
Era só.
Monaja, when you think about literature, with what Ungulani was saying about your feet on the ground and the idea of exclusion, I mean, the written word in English, by its very definition, is going to exclude. In what ways, in your experience and the work that you do, can stories start to include and add complexity outside of the written word, outside of English?
Very good question. Particularly, we come from an oral traditions, our cultures are mainly oral. I think when you look at Acephalous communities before colonialism, and even today, oral culture, and sometimes some of the organizers we have around usually think back to history and draw upon European history and say, okay, some written works were done before the French Revolution, and if we write to this moment, it's going to have the same effect. And I think, as much as there's the importance of written literature, written words, I also feel as though we, and particularly the intelligentsia, is neglecting the oral culture, the songs we sing, the songs of resistance, the puns that we say, like some of the things that we would say, that we would coin. Like when I think of the reform movement of the 1990s, song was a huge thing. What are we doing? What is the new intelligentsia, new quote unquote, I'd say emerging? What are they doing to curate some of the experiences? Especially when you speak to resistance, like the orator. What are you saying? What are the new songs that are coming out? English is also exclusive. It's not everyone who can speak. And see, there are two things. Like you can understand a language, but the language can also not speak to you. Those are two different things. Like you guys, for the Kenyans in the audience, some of you who have seen maybe Raila Odinga speaking in a rally, and when you compare him to his colleague Orengo, a politician called Orengo, sorry, Ungulani, when this politician speaks in fluent English, his message does not resonate with the crowd that he's speaking with. But when his other colleague, Raila Odinga, speaks in Kiswahili and says kitendawili, which means pan in Kiswahili, there's almost a frenzy, and people kind of react, and you're like, oh, okay, there's something going on. We have to, personally, as a performing artist, I made a political decision never to sing in English. That's just me. I mean, everyone has their own way of doing things, but I just said, either it's Kiswahili, Kimeru, English, very rarely. I actually said politically, I'll just stick to this, and I guess informed by Ngugi wa Thiong'o. And so I think, one, there needs to be some awareness on oral culture, its effect, and the idea of languages. What are we singing in Mijikenda? What are we singing in, that's Chonyi and Duruma? What are we singing in Luo? What are we singing in Maasai? The songs of resistance. And I think for me, resistance is a critical thing. Resistance is a critical thing. It's very critical. And yeah, but I don't want to go into that because you just asked me a question on language and how it excludes. Yeah.
Thanks, Monaja. Mohamed, as a young man in this country, facing this idea of who you are, how do you learn about who you are? What stories, where do you get the stories to understand who you are in your own terms? Does that make sense?
Yeah. First of all, the writing of the Somali language started in 1977 with Siad Barre. So before that, we were oral society. So like poems, songs, something like that. So when you want to send a message to the youth, or when you want to express yourself, we used to have poem ourselves. So like now we believe like, let's say like we Somalis we're the brightest of Africa. We're the ones who lead Africa. So it's one thing that something that our ancestors have still in us through poems. That's one. Second thing is after the language was implemented, all the books in Somalia and in Kenya, they were in Somali language, which means everything that was outside Somalia, it was about Africa. Not about Europe, not about America, something like that. It was about Africa. Until now, one of our musicians, they came up with a song for Africa that the Africa is sleeping, wake up. Your heroes have been killed and been taken. We must unite, something like that, in Somali language. So such we don't have in any other language, but in Somali. So when the woman is singing, she is directed to Africa. And it was for African Union. That time was OAU. You see? So as when we identify ourselves, we used to use oral. But now we are the new generations. That was during the year of our brother. Now us, it's like there's a competition between our tribes and ethnicities. Who is who? So when you see me and you say, I see Al-Shabaab, it's something else. I have to come out and show you who I am right now. So what am I going to do? We have to organize cultural interactions between the Somalis and non-Somalis. And African culture is disappearing. Decade after decade, something like that. So the firstborn of my sister, if I ask him about, in Somali, what we call the belt, he doesn't know. You see, which means the language is disappearing. Also the culture disappearing. So the only way now we can identify ourselves is to stick to our cultures and our languages. Thank you.
Thank you, Mohamed. I have to point something out. We have 3 men sitting here on the panel. And I think it's difficult to talk about a single story from the lens of a single gender. And so I wonder, I would like to throw to each one of you is what is your responsibility to include other voices Do you hand the mic over? Do you feel that, what's your feeling about including those other voices and the role, responsibility that you play in that?
O que estás a dizer agora
What you're saying now,
é muito importante. Quer dizer, se nós formos a elencar tudo, é muito
it's
importante.
very important if we go link everything.
A questão de outras vozes, mas permite-me só, porque o tempo é muito pequeno, não é?
The time is so short, but allow me just to make a...
Que eu, por exemplo, neste momento que estou a falar, fico satisfeito
Now myself, I'm satisfied.
por causa da diversidade, onde há de entrar a questão do género, pode entrar tudo. É
The
que
diversity.
em 44 anos de independência do meu
In
país,
44 years of independence of my country,
só no ano passado,
only last year,
nós ganhamos uma grande batalha,
we won a big battle.
que é a inclusão no ensino primário,
It's the inclusion in the primary school,
o ensino bilingue,
the bilingual teaching,
em que a criança aprende também na sua língua natal e simultaneamente com português.
And with the kids, the children learning their own mother tongue and the other tongue, the national
Porque é a
tongue.
única maneira, como o Monaja falou da música, eu posso dizer que é nas letras onde a criança vai aprender sobre os provérbios.
Yeah, how you sing about the music is the only way that the kids is going to learn about the verbs.
Pode aprender o que é o sinto e não sinto, como disse o outro. Mas
can-
nós assim,
You can learn what you feel.
yeah,
and
mas
what
nós
you don't
ficamos
feel.
44 anos a recusar uma realidade que estava aqui na
We were
nossa mão.
44 years refusing a reality just in front of us.
Mas mais vale tarde do que nunca, não é?
Yeah, it's more worth it late than never.
Do que isso. Isso que é uma grande conquista.
Yeah, it's a great conquer.
Porque aí vamos permitir com que a mulher para mim, quando eu falo do género da
When
mulher
I
em
talk about
África,
gender and the
a mulher em
human,
África, eu
African
falo,
woman.
em primeiro lugar, aquela criança, não é? Que tem o maior índice de abandono na escola.
So when I talk about the African woman, I'm talking about
É
that
mulher.
child who has the highest index of
Porque a,
child abandonment
porque a
at school.
estatística mostra homem e mulher entram juntos, mas poucas mulheres chegam à universidade.
The statistic shows that men and women go together into school, but only the men go
causa-
into the university.
De uma série de fatores. Então, o grande combate está aqui na educação,
A lot of battling in this education
para
aspect,
ganharmos lá à frente.
so we can win in the future.
Mas o tempo é pouco, senão outros não hão de falar.
Time is so short, I
Senão
can
Monaja,
go
outros
on
querem
forever.
falar.
Thank you, Ungulani. I think there are different ways you can look at some of what is responsible for exclusion. I mean, we can say gender excludes, race excludes, ethnicity excludes, geographical region, and so on and so forth. But above all, the principle exclusory? What excludes above anything else, in my view, is class. So, true, there's one thing to be excluded as a woman, but there's even a more severe thing to be excluded as a poor woman. There's one thing to be excluded on the basis of your ethnicity. There's another thing to be in that ethnicity excluded, and then you're a poor person from that ethnic group. So, for me, critically, the principle, of course, I try as much as possible to be aware of the intersectionality of things, how all of these things work in concert. But the principal contradiction, in my view, would be class. And I feel there's a role for those people in positions of privilege, whether male privilege, of course, the utmost being class privilege, to kind of sacrifice the privileges that are conferred upon them for others, for you to open the door well, open the door sounds a little bit patronizing, but you need to kind of sacrifice and say, okay, fine, I need to hold back, aware of the privilege that I have, aware of the class privilege, aware of the, and there needs to be that sort of thing. So for me, as an individual, if you ask me, in my endeavors, I try as much as possible to create an environment. I think as a man, you really need to be critical of certain things that you see in your environment. That if, for instance, other men are for instance, harassing women or oppressing them in different ways, I think it's up to you. The women, of course, have their role in this. It's not denying them of their agency. But people in privilege need to speak to the privilege that they have. They need to go against the grain in that sense. Yeah.
And I guess one of the greatest privileges is the privilege of seeing yourself in the world. And the idea that once your voice isn't part of the history, it is as if you don't exist.
Yeah, I mean, that's true, but I think one should also ask themselves a question. If my voice was excluded, what is the net effect of all of that? Because the truth of the matter is individualizing everything and say, okay, fine, each voice counts, but what about those groups of people who are severely oppressed than myself? So in that case, I'm more than willing to give away my voice. Take it away. If other people are going to benefit, who are less privileged than I am, I'm game. I'll sacrifice my voice in the snap of a finger. I think perhaps if you allow me to indulge, there are two things that I was kind of thinking of when you asked about literature and its role in rewriting the history of the continent. I feel, and even the construction of the continent itself is colonial. Scramble and partition of Africa, I feel that for starters, literature, through the music, cultural producers, we're all cultural producers, but those people who have dedicated their lives, a good time of their lives to production, I think they should draw upon what was there in the past, not to idealize it, not to romanticize it, or not to portray that it was idyllic, but to say other ways of being, other ways of living are possible, as opposed to the modern neoliberal state that we have. That's the first thing. The second critical thing that literature should connect all of these resistance histories. For you to, and my lecturer would tell me that history has to be relevant to the present. So you need to explain how similar resistance is what now versus how it was during the colonial times or before the colonial times. Resistance, once you catalog that resistance history, and some people would say subaltern histories, the histories of the marginalized, it kind of makes people believe that resistance is possible, even though it may seem otherwise. Thanks.
Thanks, Monaja. I think there's also an interesting circling around the idea of a single story as the idea of inclusion versus complexity, right? And so single story means not just that it's the story of a people, but that we're allowed to be many things at once. Mohamed, would you like maybe to talk a little bit about the gender question?
Yes.
I'm not fully satisfied.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I was raised by a single mother, and my father died when I was 6 years old. So it's a woman who made me who I am today. And there's a time I raised this question with our religious leaders, that why don't we focus and see how we can include women into decision making rather than just keeping them in our house. And the religion of Islam believes in women. And they said, yes, they can take over, they can lead, and they can do that. But the problem you're facing is two things: traditional and ignorance. So let me take you back to history of the Muslim. During the leadership of Ali radiallahu anhu and Uthman, the wife of Prophet Muhammad, Aisha, she was leading a ring of Muslim armies. So she was younger than them, she was a woman, and she was leading them. as a general. So now, who are you telling me that she cannot lead a country or something like a community when our own Aisha was leading the rank of the Muslim army? So we have to understand, first of all, the role of the women into our religion, at the same time how they can play when it comes to culture. So if I believe that the role of the women is to make sure that our children are fed up, they are fed in house, they have to cook, she has to cook, she has to prepare my bed, that's up to you, that's ignorance. And if you believe that they can add something and they can take us to another level that we are aiming, that's another issue. But look at Sierra Leone now. Was it Sierra Leone or Liberia? I don't know which country was that. It was in a civil war. Then the people who brought that country into stability were women. You see, how have they done that? They have surrounded the building. You see, all the warlords, politicians were there negotiating and discussing about how they can come up with a ceasefire. But on the outside, they were surrounded by women and said, you cannot leave until you make a decision. That's not how that country now today is stable. So if we ignore that contribution now and focus that women's work is at home, it's another issue. Let me take you back again to Somalia. There's a woman called Hawa. Hawa, she used to fight for freedom in Somalia when she was carrying her own baby here. You see, still we are ignorant to acknowledge their contribution. You see, so if we don't believe what we are seeing, but we always stick to the traditional, then I think that I call it injustice against the women's role, their community. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing those stories, Mohamed. I'd like to just kind of bring us back to the idea of the role of literature in understanding who we have been, who we are now, and perhaps who we can be, and to invite the audience to contribute. Do you have any? We're open. We've got about 10 minutes. Questions, comments? Garnet?
Thank you, Aleya. Now, I think for me, I've got 3 comments, one for each of the speakers. And just because you asked about the role of literature, I'll start with the last statement I was going to make to Mohamed. And Mohamed mentioned the Congo, and he mentioned Ebola. And suddenly I felt very old, because in literature, for me coming through, because I'm a student of literature, whenever we mentioned the Congo, we used to mention Heart of Darkness and Joseph Conrad. And of course, it was about the savagery, the darkness, and the dark soul of the African continent. And that was what was used for the longest time to define us. And a lot of people in literature still think that we haven't overcome that image. It's a constant struggle, even as Monaja talked about, Africa being a colonial construct. We're still struggling with that image, even as we recognize the Sankaras, who quickly disappear from the scene as they fight that struggle. But the first point I'd actually wanted to make was, and these are, I think, mostly just comments, was to Ungulani. Ungulani, today, one of the founding fathers, because Africa is full of them, and this is Robert Mugabe, is being buried quietly in his village by his family. Now, Zimbabwe had actually made arrangements in the Heroes' Corner, and they wanted to create a monument and bury him there. But I think because of the history, the family has rejected the offer and opted to bury him quietly. Now, I wanted your thoughts around this, because you talked about, the narratives, of heroes, that for you in your country are what sustain, things. So for me, I'm looking at this as, a kind of a departure. So what comment would you make on that, the fact that this is a departure? And then for Monaja, you talked about Cameroon and their national anthem and how they have changed it. And I was bringing this home to Kenya, where our anthem, starts with the, O God of all creation, bless this our land and nation. And I wanted you, given that Kenya is an 80%, so they tell us, Christian country, how well do you think our anthem has served us? Thank you.
Can you repeat for Ungulani the question, please?
Okay, no problem. Ungulani.
Because
Okay. He said that, where he comes from, their narratives of past heroes that inform the present. And so I was looking at Robert Mugabe as being a founding father, because that's who he was talking about. And the fact that he is not being buried in Heroes Corner. Yeah. So does he have a comment on that? That his family is actually burying him quietly, away from Heroes Corner. Thank you.
I don't know whether I should. So,
Huh? No. Okay. Não, olha, é uma boa questão que está a falar. A questão do monumento é simbólico, não é?
The question of the monument is symbolic, of course.
Portanto, eles põem monumento, como nós temos as ruas, não é isso?
How we have the streets,
as ruas, as avenidas, em que a narrativa única está centrada nisso.
Where the unique narrative is centered in this name or in this monument.
No caso do nosso vizinho Zimbábue,
in the case of our neighbor Zimbabwe,
ele simbolicamente está a ser colocado como herói.
He symbolically is being put as a hero.
Mas eu, se for a fazer aqui uma pergunta, se perguntarem ao grande grupo Ndembele que foi excluído da narrativa,
But here, if I'm going to make a question, if I'm
onde teve
Ndembele.
Tem os Shonas e tem os Ndembeles.
If I'm going to ask them Ndembele,
e os Ndembeles tiveram George Wankomo, não é?
They had George Wankomo.
Historically, George Wankomo teve mais tempo em termos de luta de libertação.
George Wankomo has more time in terms of fighting for libertation.
Roberto Mugabe estava a viver em Maputo.
He was living in Maputo.
Entrou na luta em 77.
Got into the fight in 77.
E o Zimbábue ficou independente em 80.
And Zimbabwe went independent in 80s.
De 80 até a morte do Mugabe.
From 80s until the death of Mugabe.
Apagaram a memória do George Wankomo.
They cut with the memory for George Wankomo.
Apagaram a memória da Mandinga Sithole.
Even the memory for.
Foi o fundador da ZANU. Apagaram a memória de outros grandes heróis.
They cut the memory for all the big heroes.
Que melhor exemplo que a senhora deu, senão de Zimbábue, para mostrar o quão perigoso é a construção de uma só narrativa.
What better example is not this man for showing how dangerous is one single narrative.
Que é o Zimbábue.
From the Zimbabwe.
Por mais que tenham enterrado dele na casa, por mais que aquele estádio tenha chorado, mas não acha que foram lágrimas de crocodilo?
Even if he was buried in his house, and even though the government has cried, you don't think they were like crocodile tears? Maybe.
It's okay.
Thank you.
I think if I got your question, well, you asked me how well do you think our anthem has spoken to our experience? I'd further question, and I'll also come back to the answer. I'd further question, how many women were involved in writing the anthem? Look at the lives of those people who wrote the anthem. Did they live well, or did they die in poverty? Like poverty as we, with very little in terms of resources, taking care of themselves. And there is a danger. Timothy Njoya, the retired cleric, one of our retired clerics called Timothy Njoya, talks about a success narrative that Kenyans sometimes tend to use. That we try to latch on patriotism, we latch on certain achievements, and you may want to problematize those achievements, say that we are a democratic nation, and so on and so forth. And when you look at that anthem and you just think through some of the lines, haki iwe ngao na mlinzi, justice be our shield and defender. How has that spoken to our experience? Just think of the resources that our political elite have versus the poverty that we have, the inequality that we have. Does Kenya really work for Kenyans, or does Kenya work for a certain elite? What was Kenya made for? That's the most critical question, I think. Once you work backwards and you find out why certain people are murdered in cold blood by police, what we call extrajudicial killings, and why that is only something that takes place for the most part in poor neighborhoods, then you'll find that these patriotic performances we have, if it's a national anthem, when I was a child, we had this thing called the loyalty pledge. It's all a sham. Kenya has never worked for the entire whole. It has always worked for a select few, just as it was in the colonial times. Thank you.
And I think, Monaja, to add to that, Kenya is working as it was designed to work. And the role of literature is to help us imagine. And in what way did we imagine for Kenya? I wonder. Any other? Yes, we have another question there.
Turn this on. Oh, it's on. Okay. A lot of the history that is taught in our schools and that we learn about in Kenyan society is essentially a false narrative, like Monaja said. And I have a question around, Monaja talked about African ways of life. We are not taught about the kingdoms, for instance, that existed on this continent, the kingdoms of Sudan, Egypt, Mutapa Kingdom, and all these things. And so we grow up essentially from a point of inferiority, like Monaja said. And so it essentially is because this history is history in the service of empire. In the distant past, it services empire and its interests. And in the recent past, it services the interests of the ruling class. And it's a perfect history for the agenda and for what they want to achieve out of it. And so when we come back to literature, I have a feeling that our literature today doesn't speak to the political and economic conditions of the people, the contradictions in society, both historical and present. And so when I think of literature and history, trying to situate history within literature, I'm also thinking of how literature then becomes a tool of correction. And if possible, how can literature then be in service of the African Revolution? Because in the 60s, 70s, in this country, literature was deemed as dangerous, and writers were arrested or jailed and all these things. And so what is missing? What is the missing link between literature and history? That's what I'm most interested in.
Is there someone who'd like to answer from... Again?
Eu não posso falar. Eu do Quênia pagaram bilhete, senão.
We need to understand the question more specifically.
Would you mind rephrasing the question?
Just like...
Just the question, not the context.
The question itself is, if you look at African literature and you try to situate African history within that literature, in this day and age, if you are to speak of today, are there specific ways in which literature can be of service to the African revolution, so to speak, because of lack of a better word?
Can I? I think understanding the link between literature and history. I think what is different right now is that imperialism is more subtle. People would kind of the bureaucracies, the abstract way that the state works. It's very hard to kind of understand how oppression works now as opposed to the colonial times. Because we'd say, white man, that's our enemy. Mau Mau. You know, that was very simple. But now it's more subtle. How does the IMF work? How does the World Bank work? How does the Western governments work in election times and even before, really? And one, we need to understand the context. So I'd say that's one of the things that literature needs. Those people who are creating songs, books, this and that, they need to understand the context that we are living in. And secondly, they need to be driven by some urgency. And I know I may sound a little bit utilitarian here. I come from a school of thought where literature, for me, the most important thing, knowledge, literature, is solving a political problem. That's my priority, first priority. Knowledge for knowledge's sake comes second for me. First priority is knowledge to solve a political problem. And once you realize that your intellectual hankerings are secondary to the suffering of a bigger group of people, then that's when you're going to say, I'm done with literature for fascination's sake, and I'm going to work on literature to solve a political problem. And so that urgency has to be there. And that is what I feel sometimes lacks. Thank you.
Ainda ontem,
Yet yesterday,
eu estava a ler a entrevista desse grande escritor, que não é só caniano, mas africano e mundial, que é Gunga Thiong'o.
I was reading yesterday the interview for
Eu estava a ler a
Gunga
entrevista.
Thiong'o.
E ele disse uma coisa,
He said something.
que ele foi preso, esteve preso aqui no tempo, parece-me que era o ministro do interior, era o falecido presidente do Arap Moi, se não estou em erro.
He was arrested, and at that time
E ele disse que foi preso porque ele estava a escrever e a revoltar-se, porque os camponeses que deram grande força, não é, foram excluídos, digamos, na narrativa oficial.
So
Isso que estamos a falar.
he was arrested because he was claiming that the villagers that fought and had an important play on the fights were not remembered in the narratives, so he was arrested by them.
O mesmo exemplo podemos apanhar nos anos 60 na Nigéria,
In the 60s
com o
in
Soyinka Chinua-Achebe. E podemos apanhar talvez no Senegal, pelo fato de ter estado lá como presidente, o Senghor, mas outros escritores que se opuseram a um tipo de narrativa de sociedade. Não entendeste? Eu falei muito depressa. Você vê que está bom.
So in Senegal,
Não, ok. A mesma coisa podemos falar na Nigéria,
so in Nigeria, we can say the same thing.
com Soyinka e Chinua-Achebe
Yeah, these leaders,
e outros países.
and other countries,
Eles tinham tipo de escrita e tipo de intervenção
they had a kind of writing and a kind of intervention
que era no chamado neocolonialismo.
that they called it neocolonialism.
Era tipo de intervenção. Mas hoje a pergunta que colocas a nós todos,
Now the question you are putting to all of us,
nestas nossas sociedades contemporâneas que vivemos hoje,
in our contemporary society,
há uma série de questões que se colocam.
there are dozens of questions that we can put.
Se eu entendi um bocadinho o meu mau inglês,
If I understood my bad English,
do que o Monaja disse, não é isso?
what he said,
ele coloca uma certa complexidade nisso, né? Onde a questão do género entra, não é?
Put some complexity.
Onde a
The
questão da
gender,
identidade entra.
identity. Where does it get in the history?
Identidade.
Identity. Yeah.
Que eu acho que esta questão da identidade é fundamental para
It's a
nós,
fundamental question, the identity
nesta
question
etapa que nós vivemos.
nowadays.
Que não é uma etapa que a gente fala de ideologia.
It's not a step in which we talk about
Do
ideology.
jeito que, pronto, socialismo, não. Acima de tudo, nós estamos a falar de uma questão de identidade e oportunidade.
Above all, we were talking about identity and opportunity.
Uma questão, eu agora posso ser mais claro,
Now I can be clear.
porque aqui uma pessoa tem que ser um pouco diplomata, porque pagaram um bilhete, etc,
Here you
etc.
have to be diplomatic and pay the ticket.
Então estou hospedado.
Let me explain.
Mas há exemplos, não é? A não inclusão, a não inclusão é evidente em muitos dos nossos países.
The non-inclusion is evident in our countries.
A supremacia de um grupo étnico.
The supremacy of an ethnic group.
E isso, quer dizer, é a secundarização do outro.
The secondarization of the other.
Portanto, a nossa grande luta é para que todos nós façamos a mesma coisa. Eu vejo o caso da Tanzânia.
We are fighting for each one of us to be making the same thing, to be equal.
Desde o
to the
tempo
same.
de Julius Nyerere. No, time of Nyerere.
Nyerere, Tanzania?
Yeah, desde o tempo de Julius Nyerere.
Since James Nyerere, the president of Tanzania,
Em que se acordou que o presidente do continente, se fosse um presidente da hora do continente, o primeiro-ministro teria que ser do Zanzibar.
they agreed that if the president was from the continent, the first minister had to be from
E
Zanzibar,
vice-versa.
and vice versa.
Isto é o exemplo de inclusão.
This is an example of inclusion.
Né? E, portanto, são dessas pequenas coisas que nós, muitas das vezes, os poderes descuram,
So many times the powers
descuram, que ignoram ou
they
secundarizam.
ignore these
Yeah.
kind of things.
E que levam que os conflitos sejam permanentes.
So the conflicts, they become permanent.
No meu país,
In my country,
as pessoas da região sul de Moçambique
people from the southern part of Mozambique,
tiveram sempre um grande privilégio.
não privilege, desprivilege.
Privilégio.
They had always a place of privilege, the southern part.
O resultado, tivemos uma guerra de 16 anos.
The result of that, we had a war for 16 years.
Por quê? Porque não soubemos incluir o outro.
Because we couldn't include the other.
E retrocedemos.
And then we walked back.
O outro aspecto que o Monaja também falou, que é a questão, digamos, da língua, não
We
é?
also talk about the language.
Que na música nós encontramos a grande mensagem,
In music, we can find the big messages.
mas nós outros, no nosso caso, na literatura,
The rest of us in literature,
nós não temos outra hipótese, porque já desde crianças
we don't have another hypothesis because since kids,
obrigaram-nos a falar as nossas línguas no quintal da casa,
they forced us to speak our own languages in the garden.
porque
in the
éramos
backyard.
obrigados a falar a língua
We
portuguesa.
were forced to speak Portuguese language.
Então não há ninguém da minha geração que sabe escrever uma língua. Eu falo uma língua, mas não sei
So
escrever.
there's no one in my generation who can speak a language but write it.
Como muitos aqui escrevem Kikuyu, escrevem em outras línguas.
They can't write Kikuyu, but
Mas
they
a
speak.
colonização portuguesa matou.
Portuguese colonization killed it.
E nós só 40 anos depois é que estamos a tentar ver, e vamos ter uma geração talvez daqui a 50 anos que vai recuperar, digamos, muitas coisas da nossa identidade.
So maybe 50 years from now, a lot of people are gonna recover some things about our identities that we are losing now and we've been losing for the 40 years back.
E o que é que nós como escritores agora fazemos?
And now we as writers, what do?
É incluir na língua portuguesa os nossos valores.
We include in the Portuguese language our values.
É domar a língua portuguesa, fazer com que essa língua seja uma língua inteiramente africana.
You make the Portuguese language to be entirely African language.
Nem que eu, que sou de um grupo tal, introduza um pouco do significado,
Yeah, even if I'm from a small group, I put a little bit of my meaning on it.
o outro também vai introduzir o
The
outro.
other will put his own meaning on it,
E a língua vai ganhar com isso.
and the language is going to win with that.
Enquanto recuperamos a nossa identidade
While we are
e os nossos valores.
we are recovering our identities and values.
Portanto, eu talvez diga como o Monaja, quer dizer, hoje a literatura tu já não podes dizer assim. Pronto, há pessoas que dizem, não, eu sou do gênero tal, mas não, nós refletimos uma realidade que é a realidade que nós temos hoje, que não é assim tão esquemática como era do tempo dos ngunguis, soincas e não sei. Hoje a realidade é muito complexa. Eu estou a falar muito, né?
These are tribes or genres of literature?
Oh, não.
So nowadays we don't have so many categories for this. Yeah.
É muito complexo.
Mas na literatura ou nas tribos?
Não, na literatura.
In
Hoje,
literature we don't have so many categories as we had before.
Thank you, Ungulani. This is definitely a topic we could go on for a long time discussing. Perhaps just to wind things down, in the spirit of the idea of Macondo as this land of possibility, I'd like to ask each of you to share with us a piece of literature. And when I say literature, I mean it can exist in music, it can exist on stage, it can exist on the page. That for you kind of reimagines ourselves or yourself, gives you a sense of who you have been and who you can be. Perhaps challenges this history that you've been taught. Is that clear?
That makes you reimagine who you
Yeah. That gives you a possibility of something else that beyond what you've been told you are.
I think sometimes it's selfish to quote oneself, but hizi pingu zimenifunga zikanshinda kusonga, kusonga mbele, nashindwa kanta shinda hapa milele, nahitaji ukombozi, sahi, nahitaji ukombozi, sahi. Hizi pingu zimenifunga zikanshinda kusonga, kusonga mbele, nashindwa kanta shinda hapa milele, nahitaji ukombozi, sahi, nahitaji ukombozi, sahi. Thanks.
I don't know the song, but there's a song that I used to listen, and it was in Somali language. But I just want to tell you why I like it. That song is about, if you work hard, you'll achieve. Take an example, the eagle that flies above, at the same time, the turtles we have on the ground, they all have their means to eat. And they want to provide, it's our creator God. So what you have to do is work hard. USA, they have the same brains we have when they were going to the moon. So as Africans, we can also go beyond the moon up to the sun. It was a Somali song that I don't remember that much. We used to sing that song when we were in schools. And on the other hand, we used to be called that Africans, we are usually from apes. You remember? Revolution, something like that, until man. And on the other hand, we have a religion that says we are from Adam and Eve. So when you're in the school, you believe that, yeah, we were monkeys previous. When you're in your home, you believe that we are from where? Adam and Eve. But when you come out of the school, and you are where we are now, is then now when you can change your mind and see the positivity of the world and how you can change it. And you can understand where you came from.
Thank you. Should I repeat it?
No, it's about Macondo, right?
Just a piece of literature that you feel gives you a new sense of who we could be.
Eu tenho problema. tenho problema que é de memória neolítica.
I have a problem of memory neolithical.
Que a coisa desaparece logo, não fica.
Things fade away.
Mas já que estamos aqui no Macondo, né?
Since we're here in Macondo,
Estamos agora a emergir essa frase, quer dizer, que vem logo no princípio do livro dos 100 anos.
it's coming back to my mind the phrase that comes right in the beginning of the
Quando
book.
o Aurélio Buendia,
When Aurelio
Buendia,
Buendia
levou o filho para conhecer o gelo,
is taking the son to meet the Danis.
Isso, gelo.
Genro.
Gelo.
Oh, okay. Name.
Ice.
He's taking the son to meet the Genro. Yeah.
Yeah. E dizia que o mundo era tão recente, que as coisas careciam de nome.
So he would say that the world is so recent that things lacked names.
Isso é para dizer que não há países velhos, também não há países baixos, tudo é importante.
That's to say that
E o que é importante para mim e em literatura, só para dizer isso, é que nós, estando em África, todos nós temos o nosso Macondo, né? É aquele nosso local que aparentemente a gente nem dá por ela, não é? Eu às vezes escrevi o meu primeiro livro, é sobre um imperador. Eu disse, mas quem lá vai saber quem é um cungunhana? Não, mas pronto, eu só recebo dos Estados Unidos porque interessa, porque aquele pedacinho ganha universalidade quando nós escrevemos com alma e com sinceridade.
That's to say that we don't have an old country or a young country, and even our Africas, even us, we have our own Macondos, our own special place that, yeah, you went far.
E que tudo que nós escrevemos, cada um de nós tem o seu pequeno Macondo.
Yes, each one of us that write, each one of us have our own small Macondo.
E que aquela realidade nossa,
This reality of ours,
aparentemente sem conexão com o mundo,
apparently with no connection to the world,
mas quando nós retratamos a complexidade dela,
though when we describe its complexity,
ela ganha universalidade.
it gains a new reality and universality.
Por isso que o nosso livro é lido em todos os cantos, mas partindo de uma realidade, de uma aldeia remota
that's
do
why
Quênia,
we have
ou
our-
uma aldeia.
We have our book written from one single place, a small place, but we have it read by all the world.
É só isso.
That's it.
Thank you so much for a wonderful discussion. Thank you, Ungulani. Thank you, Monaja. Thank you, Mohamed. Thank you, Gabriela. And thank all of you. I hope you have a lovely rest of the afternoon. There's still lots more planned, so wander around and enjoy Macondo. Bye-bye.